So you've spent the last 60 minutes experiencing the lesson plan on the Red Scare, where we utilized informational text to end up writing an elevator speech, and we also talked about compelling and supporting questions. So at this time, we are going to participate in what we call the balcony view, or teacher to teacher, where we're going to take a look at the professional learning that we did, kind of from the view of the balcony, and talk about the techniques and the standards that were addressed during this learning experience. So then you can apply that to your work. So let's go. So in the Schoology course, there is not a place to record your thinking in a discussion board. So I'm really going to ask that you guys talk to each other about these because this really is the most important piece of the learning. If you are working alone, consider these questions and then make notes to yourself because this will help you improve your practice. So reflections on the Red Scare. I want you to think about what previous professional learning was incorporated into this learning experience. So thinking back to pretty much the last couple of years, what was embedded here? What was new? And how could you use this strategy in your classroom? So take a moment to write down your thoughts. And you guys, taking a step back once again from the balcony view, you're going to notice that during my professional practice, I ask the participants to always write down their thinking first. The reason that you do that is it gives everyone the time to respond because you guys know how it is in class. When you ask a question, someone's going to raise their hand. Usually that's the person that you reply to. No matter how long we wait on wait time, it's still usually those same kids. So by having each student write down their thinking first, we're providing everybody an opportunity to learn, even if we don't call on that student. Then while the students are writing, you can be walking around the classroom, seeing what they've written down, and then you can kind of pick who you're going to call on to respond to your questions. So once again, what previous professional learning was incorporated into this learning experience, the Red Scare? What was new? And how could you use this strategy or any of the strategies in your classroom? Go ahead and pause the video now. Take about 2 minutes to write down your first thinking and then discuss it as a group. If you're working alone, just go ahead and write down your thoughts. Thanks. So remember, in now that you've thought about and talked about what was addressed in the Red Scare and what was not, let's think about the skills that the students need to have in order to engage independently in the Red Scare learning experience. So let's think about that. Think about what skills, not just the content, because it really was a skills lesson using our content. What skills do those students need to have in order to engage independently in the Red Scare learning experience? Because remember, you guys, in the end, we want the kids to be able to do this on their own. So take a minute, write down your first thoughts before discussing, and then discuss with your colleagues. Go ahead and pause the video, and when you're done discussing, turn it back on. Thanks. So let's dig in a little bit deeper. Includes our standards, instructional shifts, and dimension 2 of the C3 framework. First, let's talk about our standards. This lesson incorporated both a content standard as well as literacy standards, and within that content standard, there's embedded skills like trace. That was one of the skills the kids needed, or investigate. I believe they needed to consider and explain or explore. So we have our first content standard. And then we have the speaking and listening standards that were addressed as well. And those are our literacy standards for our discipline of social studies. So we addressed these standards. Then we took a look at the instructional shifts. So shift number 2 is disciplinary integrity and interdisciplinary connections matter. And we had those interdisciplinary connections as we brought in the speaking and listening skills as well as the writing skills. We predominantly focused on history, but we were bringing in the literacy skills from what used to be just thought of as an ELA thing. So once again, that emphasizes literacy in the content area, and this is emphasizing regular practice with complex text and their academic language. Truman's excerpt, that is a complicated academic text that we asked our students to read. The overview of the History Channel required some prior knowledge, and then also we had the video, which actually is hard because kids really have to listen to hear what's being said. So then reading, writing, and speaking grounded in evidence from text, both literary and informational. When we were doing this practice, you guys had to write your elevator speech utilizing evidence from the text. So we had to write with evidence, and then you had to speak with evidence. And then finally, you were building knowledge through content-rich nonfiction, which included the excerpt from Truman's speech. Actually, everything we read today was nonfiction text. Some of it was primary sources and some of it was secondary sources. So then we're digging a little bit deeper into Dimension 2 of the C3 framework. And here you're applying disciplinary tools and concepts. So we were looking at historical thinking, change, continuity, and context. Remember, the setting is important, and we talked about that at the beginning of the lesson. And you guys, when you're talking to your students, having them set that context is critical. And sometimes, because they don't have that same knowledge that we do, showing a brief video clip to give them that stage or that setting is really helpful to kind of help us all get in that same experience. We used historical sources and evidence. Clearly, that was part of the activity. And then causation and argumentation, because around the compelling question, the students had to take a side on whether they believed that the post-World War II communist threat was real. Which leads us into Dimension 1, which is developing questions and planning inquiries. And we have discussed this a lot. In our previous learning, you guys have worked on compelling questions and supporting questions. And it's really important for us to have our students develop questions, not only respond to questions. And that was the reason why you engaged in the activity where you wrote questions responding to the compelling question, which could also then drive inquiry depending on the depth of the questions that were written. Dimension 3, evaluating sources and using evidence. In this activity, you didn't say, was this a good piece of evidence or a bad piece of evidence for our sources, but you did use that evidence when you were writing your speeches. Those are critical features for students. And you guys, we accomplished all of these in 90 minutes. We did writing for understanding. We incorporated speaking and listening when you spoke into Schoology and then you listened to reply to your colleagues. We looked at primary and secondary sources. We did close reading on those. And all of that was done in 90 minutes. So I know that we can move forward and engage our kids in this kind of lesson planning. And I hope that you guys see how you can use this in your classroom. Also, the assessment that had 2 readings and 1 video. This is very similar to the experience our students will have when they take those end of course assessments that are the ELA assessments. However, one of those questions is around social studies topics, and it looks very similar to this, with 2 document sources and then 1 video or possibly a song, those things for the kids to analyze and then interpret and move forward in that test. So there you go. That's kind of our teacher to teacher taking a deep look at what we did over the past 90 minutes. Next, you're going to be moving into the C3 framework, Dimension 2, and really looking deeper at applying disciplinary concepts and tools. And we're not just looking at Dimension 2, we're going to look at kind of the big picture and then dive into Dimension 2. So thank you, and I hope you enjoyed your learning experience.